Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to talk about everything I wish someone would have told me about winter bass fishing. It is winter. I'm not dressed up like this just for the fun of it. It is absolutely freezing out here. I can barely feel my hands, but I've got a ton of requests on winter bass fishing videos, so that's exactly what we're going to do today. The temps are cold, the water's cold, but that doesn't mean there aren't fish still to be caught out there, and that's what we're going to break down today. First, we're going to talk about some bait selection, then we're going to talk about how to pick out your areas in the winter, and lastly, we're going to be actually fishing for some of these fish and hopefully catch some fat smallmouth out here. These tips will apply to largemouth and spotted bass as well, but we will be fishing for smallmouth today, so stay tuned and let's get right into it. All right, so before we get back to doing some winter bass fishing here, let's talk quickly about area selection and bait selection. Those are going to be your two biggest things with wintertime bass fishing. First thing's going to be your bait selection. You have almost no choices this time of year. There's very limited stuff that you can use that will actually work. Top waters, right off the table. Most crankbaits, right off the table. Most spinnerbaits, right off the table. Like all that kind of stuff you're not going to be able to really fish. Like I'm talking true wintertime fishing, not late fall where the water temperature is 55 degrees and those fish will still chase baits. I'm talking 45-degree water temperature, which we get up here in the Northeast. You have very limited options. Today's video, I think I had an A-rig on deck. I had a finesse swim bait, a blade bait, a jig, a Ned rig, and a Demiki rig. So a couple of those reaction type baits, but reaction baits being like a giant ball of shad that they can't say no to, or like a single swim bait just barely crawling along the bottom as slow as you can. Demiki rig slowly floated over their head when they're suspended. Other than that, it's dragging baits on the bottom. That's like the biggest thing this time of year. There are more selections than just those baits right there. Depends on where you live. Like if you're fishing somewhere where a shad wrap would work as a crankbait or a flat-sided crankbait because those fish still feed on shad and live shallow in the winter, that's great. Use that kind of stuff. But just when you're picking out your baits, that's what you have to keep in consideration is how active these fish are and how active their food is. Like it's not going to move around as much as it usually does throughout the rest of the year. So you have to be cognizant of that when choosing your baits. There's certain stuff that just will not work this time of year because it's unnatural to what those fish are doing in the water. And before we talk about area selection, this part of the video is sponsored by the Omnia Premium Pro app. I will utilize this app to actually help me find areas out there on the water. So what this app is a way to combine weather data and mapping data into one. So right now they don't have the Navionics license in play yet, but it will be here in the very near future. I've been using the CMAP layer here and then utilizing the wind layer to determine where I should be fishing. One, for my own comfort because the wind is going to make it very cold out there in the winter, but also any dirty water is really going to make it hard for you in the winter time. So I'll use it to find clearer water. I can also use the water clarity layer to find the cleanest water and the wind layer to determine where I need to be fishing so I can get back in some protected areas where the fish might bite a little bit better. But that is how I utilize the app to find some areas that I'm fishing for. So if you want to check it out, there'll be a link in the description below. But for now, let's get into the actual portion of area selection, talking about key areas that you need to fish. So the biggest thing about area selection this time of year is 100% going to be a lot of your fish are going to live in a very limited area of water. So most, again, as most of your baits are out of play, a lot of your water's out of play too. A bass is just simply not going to live on a laydown in 2 foot of water when the water temperature is 42 degrees and that could be frozen 3 weeks from now. They will live shallow. There's always bass that live shallow. That I get that 100%. But if you want to find the big schools of fish, and that's the one nice thing about wintertime bass fishing, is if you land on them, you can really land on them this time of year and catch a ton of fish. You're going to have to look deeper. Lakes, stuff like that, those fish are going to move offshore and they're going to live on areas of change where bait is going to be around. So rock piles, offshore ledges, anything like that, that's a big change in the bottom that will also draw bait. They have to have bait nearby because they need to live throughout the winter, but they're just going to hang out there and kind of chill on some offshore places this time of year. The other thing is if you fish rivers, you got to have current breaks. While some fish in the summers and spring and fall might live in the current and you want current hitting them in the face to be able to catch them, they're still in a current break, but it's a smaller one. This time of year, you're looking for a very large current break, like a point that sticks out and you can just see all the water swirling on the backside. That's perfect area for them just to sit there and do nothing. One of the places we're going to look at today, it's a big point that sticks out underwater and then has a depression on the back end, so that current washes over the top and just keeps going, and those fish can hide right in that depression behind it and come up and get a bait if they need to, but for the most part they just sit down there and expend no energy. So that's what you're going to be looking for this time of year, something that's very protected, something that's the warmest waters actually start going to be becoming the deeper water in the lake as that surface temperature cools down, and that's where those fish are going to go. You're going to find the warmest water you can, the most protected water you can that has bait nearby and something to really draw those fish in, some type of area of change. That's what you're going to be looking for. So now let's head out on the water, show you how and where to fish your baits and catch a couple fish along the way. All right, so now that we talked about bait selection, area selection, scouting those places out before you actually get out here on the water to save some time, let's actually do some fishing. So I treat winter the exact same as I do any other season. I'm always going to start with a search bait. However, your search baits are limited to like minimal to none that you can actually fish this time of year. And by search bait, I just mean something that's moving to cover a little bit of water. We'll show you that here in just a second. You can barely even fish this bait quickly. So up here on the front deck, we got a Damiki rig, we got Ned rigs, we got blade bait, we got jig. That's about it. And then we have a swim bait here. So like that's pretty much covered all the bait selection that we talked about. But this little finesse swim bait works no matter how cold the water gets. And the reason is you can just crawl it so slowly along the bottom and that tail still kicks. So there's still minnows that live in the river and they swim around and just gently dart around in behind rocks and hang out. So that is the perfect way to mimic it. However, you can't like fish this like a swim bait like you would in the spring and just burn it around down the bank here and expect to get bit. So that's where the scouting the areas comes in prior. Then you can fish those areas thoroughly and have confidence that your bait's in front of fish. And if you're not getting bites, to leave and go to another area, not try and find areas with this bait. So that's what I mean by search bait here. Now, we have an area right in front of us here. It's a shelf that drops off a little bit deeper on the back end. Those fish can sit in that current break behind it. And there's a point up ahead that blocks the current on this little right-hand side here. So all we're gonna do is dot our bait right down that current seam there, and we'll fish a little bit on the inside all the way back into the current seam, especially in the winter, because they can start to push their way in a little bit because the water gets too cold and they really just do not wanna move at all. I let that thing sink all the way to the bottom, and then I just start a slow retrieve, bouncing it along the bottom. I want to feel my bait bouncing on the bottom the whole time. There's a very slim chance that these fish will actually come off the bottom to get your bait this time of year. So if your bait's not plowing into the bottom down there, whether it's a Ned rig, a blade bait, a jig, whatever you're using, those fish are probably not going to bite it. Unless you're fishing a Damiki rig, looking at fish that are suspended, you're most likely going to need your bait to pound into the bottom this time of year to get bites, and you're going to need it to go very slowly because those fish do not want to eat this time of year. Well, they still want to eat, but they don't want to move. So what I'm doing with this swim bait is just crawling it along the bottom, and you can see that with my reel. I'm crawling this thing as slow as I can, just keeping it ticking along the bottom, hopefully coming in front of a fish. Now, they'll sit behind those rock piles and do whatever. And just kind of hang out. But if this thing rolls over one of those rock piles and drops right in front of their face, they have a hard time saying no to it. They still need to eat, and if a piece of food comes right in front of them, they're probably going to bite it. So that's where the search bait comes into play. I'm going to pick apart this little current seam with this quicker than I could with a Ned rig to see if there's actually any active fish in here that are willing to bite this bait. So I'm just going to keep bouncing this thing through the current seam here, and then if this one doesn't work, I know pretty quickly that I can bail out of here and go to a different one and try and get a bite somewhere else. So let's take a few casts around, see what happens, and then maybe we'll go on to another area. There we go. That one ate it right off the bottom. Trying to keep that bait down there where those fish live is the most important thing. And if you notice, I actually killed my reel for a second, let that thing sink back down to the bottom. This has got to be a big fish because he is not coming up. Yeah, it's a pretty good one. He's like half black and half gray. It's a weird looking fish. He's literally, what? That's crazy looking. Let me get this fish up here and show you guys this real fast. Pretty good fish right there. You can see on the side of his body here, he's got like this weird black mark, and his head is like darker and his tail is lighter. Pretty cool. But not a bad fish right there. We're gonna throw him back. He's pretty cold and I don't feel like holding him that long. So like I was talking about, you got to keep your bait on the bottom. And what I was doing there was I was reeling and I felt my bait leave the bottom. I wasn't feeling rocks anymore. So I stopped my reel, let it sink back down to the bottom. As soon as that thing touched the bottom, I took like 2 cranks and he jumped right on it. So my bait was going over top of the fish. Once I got it down to where those fish live, they were willing to bite it. So let's throw it back over there, see if we can duplicate that. So a lot of times, like we talked about with area selection, like 90% of your fish are gonna live all right on top of each other this time of year. So if you catch one, almost always there will be more fish there to catch. So let's throw it back over there and see if that's true. See if we can catch us one. Might take a cast or two, but they should be there. All right, so we've gone a few minutes without a bite, which is fine. Winter fishing can be tough, but a lot of times what I'll do before determining if I need to move on spots or stay here is I'll try and work on the fish a little bit more if I've had bites. So I'm gonna go to the Demiki here. I know that's not really much different than what I was just throwing, but it's a little more finesse profile of it. If I get bites, great. If I don't, we'll be moving on to a new area. Just to see if we can find some fresh fish or ones that are active and willing to bite. And that's kind of how I'll approach an area this time of year. I could throw the Ned rig in there or really anything. You can just follow up with something else that they haven't seen yet that could be a little bit more of a fresher presentation to them. And that's basically all I'll do to work those fish over a little bit, kind of finesse them. And if they don't bite, on to the next one. There we go. Just when I wasn't getting any bites, rolled up in this current break here and we got one. Oh my gosh, it's a tank. No, he came off. Ah. That was my mistake. I bent my hook out on him. I was putting too much pressure on him. But that's another bite right there. Exactly what I mean, just rolling that through that current break real slow. Fishing slow enough to keep them on. When you hook a fish in the winter, there's no need to fight them that hard like I just did. I was just very excited to get that one into the boat, and that cost me getting him into the boat. You can see when he got up to the surface, he barely even wanted to do anything. He just kind of flopped around, fell back into the water. They do not fight hard. They'll pull hard, but they're not going to jump. They're not going to do all kinds of crazy stuff. So you shouldn't lose too many fish this time of year unless you get too excited like I just did. So let's see if we can get one more, cap this video off here, see if we can get us another one out of this current break. Like I said, now we know there's fish in here. So now I'm just going to repeat the process of what we've been doing. So I'll probably fish this swim bait through there a couple more times. If that doesn't get bit, I actually haven't tried the Ned rig today, so maybe we'll toss that in there and see if we can get us a bite on the Ned. Well, unfortunately, also part of winter bass fishing is days where you catch nothing or you struggle a lot. Like I said, anybody that tells you this is easy this time of year, completely lying. I haven't had a bite in hours, can't figure anything out. I cannot feel my hands, I can't feel my face. It started snowing a little bit ago, stopped for a minute. I'm beyond freezing, so we're gonna have to wrap today's video up early. I'm not gonna be able to catch another fish here. Another thing with winter bass fishing, please be safe out there. You can actually seriously harm yourself by fishing this time of year. I can't feel my hands anymore, and I know that that's a big issue. I don't want it to get any worse. I still have to load the boat up and do all that kind of stuff, so I want to be able to make sure I have enough energy to be able to do all that and get everything on the trailer and home safely. So please be smart while you're out there winter fishing. But Make the most of it. Catch as many fish as you can before winter's over. If you want to see how to fish this finesse swim bait and catch fish, go ahead and check this video out right here. Hit the subscribe button down below, and thanks for watching.